and welcome to the Legal Eagle. One of the country's topmost criminal lawyers, he's former Additional Solicitor General, he's also a senior advocate in the Supreme Court. I welcome on the show today Senior Advocate Mr. Siddharth Luthra. Mr. Luthra, as I welcome you on the show, the first question that I ask you today, you've been in 1991 a member of the bar. You're someone who was in school a mathematics buff. You wanted to be an architect, but in the end you followed in the footsteps of your famous father, who was also a very famous lawyer. You also at one time tried to practice freelance journalism, which is something I'm very intrigued with. But in the end, I want to know, as a famous criminal lawyer, my first question, what are the milestones that you have seen in your life, and how are you looking at the successes and which are the impactful cases in your career, sir?
The the milestones in my life were good and bad. I started off coming back after a master's at Cambridge in 1991. I worked with the law firm Bhasin and Company with Mr. Lalit Bhasin, Mrs. Neena Bhasin. I trained under them. And by 92, I started working under my late father. I didn't want to practice criminal law. I wanted to teach also. So I did apply, missed the date, and then I did teach in the Delhi University in 1997, before your time. And after teaching, my passion would have been teaching, but in 96, my late father fell ill. In 97, he passed away suddenly. It was early, he was 72. As a result, I inherited his criminal practice, and from being a civil commercial lawyer, I was a suited booted lawyer doing corporate work, commercial work, running around advising people on industrial licenses and permissions for industries, setting up companies. I had to switch. Criminal practice, that was a milestone in my career, because unfortunate because I lost my father, but then I had this work to do and I had no option. So I felt a little like Abhimanyu, who knows how to get in to the Chakravyuh but doesn't know how to come out. So I used to pore over my father's notes trying to understand why he'd marked a file a certain way. I survived that. The next, soon I did get some criminal work. And in 98, I started doing a very important case, a trial, and then in the High Court in Bangalore, which was the classic computers. It was a matter which my late father was doing. In fact, Ketki, my wife, was doing it with my late father, and then, because she was expecting our second baby, then I inherited it, and I started doing that matter. And that was a big one, because for 2 years, from 98 till 2000, I was practically living in Bangalore 15 to 18 days a month away from the family. Difficult. My client used to let me come back 3 or 4 times a month. That was the understanding with the client. And I stayed in the Bangalore club and so on and so forth. The next was Tehelka. Tehelka was like a bolt from the blue. It came, my dear friend Kavin Gulati, one of my most cherished and closest friends in the legal profession, one of my most closest friends, reached out to me. We knew each other, but we were not friendly in that sense, and insisted that I help him with the trial, with the proceedings. And the Tehelka Commission changed my profile, changed my understanding of myself as a lawyer, because we were up against the best in the country, and the world media was watching us. So we were on TV almost every alternate day, and it's very heady for a young lawyer who knows little and is just trying to survive in this, in this battlefield with all the top. Mr. Salve was there, Mr. Nariman was there, Mr. Sorabji was there. Everybody, top lawyers, were coming on the other side, and it was quite, Justice Lalit used to come on the other side. It was a very tough moment. Mr. Subramaniam was appearing for the commission. So all the top people. That was a great watershed. After that, I did some tribunals, unlawful activities tribunals and others. And that was interesting, because there I believed that I needed to fight for the human rights of people who were facing on the wrong side of the law. That's been a deep abiding belief in me always, that we need to give legal access to those who don't have, we need to provide legal services to those who don't have legal access. And that's a very important thing, because marginalization of legal access is one of the worst things that can happen to a society. In 2007, I got designated from the Delhi High Court. Actually, before that, there were 2 judges who made a great impact in my life, 2 or 3 in the High Court. Justice Manmohan Sareen made a great impact. He encouraged me a lot. Justice Sikri, Justice R.C. Chopra, Justice S.K. Agarwal, Justice Bhandari, many, many judges, Justice Swatantra Kumar, and even Justice Thakur. And I must tell you, two of the judges, Justice Bhandari and Justice S.K. Agarwal, when I was a young lawyer, 2002 or 3, they would not give me a passover. So I was a little concerned. I said, sir, I'm asking for a passover. They said, no, now you're too senior. We're not going to give you a passover. You have to argue the matter. So that got me thinking, is it time to look at designation? And then Justice Sikri egged me on, Justice Sarin egged me on, said you must. He retired as Chief Justice J&K High Court. And they egged me on to apply, and I applied in 2007. I was designated as a senior counsel. There is a photograph which I will share with you, with me and my entire chambers. That changed me. Suddenly, there was a host of new challenges. It was tough. I had to reinvent myself. I didn't know what it meant to be senior, and I had almost nobody to guide me. So I was just taking baby steps, but I survived. The next big milestone was the Soumitra Sen Commission of Inquiry, where I was asked to assist the committee to be the government advocate, and assist the committee in the impeachment of a Calcutta High Court Judge, Justice Soumitra Sen. That was very challenging. I'd not done so much practice of constitutional law, so there was a mix of constitutional law, criminal law evidence, and it was very challenging. I had to work very hard. I actually locked myself up on 2 occasions for 3 weeks each in a room, in fact, not even in my own office, in a colleague's office, put off my phones and just worked on those briefs. I couldn't have done it otherwise. The message that I want to send to my young colleagues and to people who are watching is that we should not be diffident. There's, my dad used to say, his guru taught him, Vakil na ake na bake na jhakes. Don't be diffident. Don't have stamina. And don't speak irrelevantly. Don't be irrelevant. Don't be diffident. And always be strong. Your physical health is also very important to be a successful professional. Look at Mr. Jethmalani. He continued for so long. Mr. Nariman and others, God bless them, with good health. So I think it's very important that the rights of individuals must be paramount in every legal professional's minds. The day we start treating individuals as cases is a sad day for ourselves, because these are human lives we're dealing with. The practice of criminal law is the study of human nature, is the study of human lives. We can't think of it in commercial terms. It's liberty after all. It's life and liberty. And the Constitution upholds it, and so must we.
In fact, Mr. Luthra, this seems to be quite a journey that we are looking at. I also remember when I was going through this, your father had once said, and you've always followed this, you have to be so good and thorough that no one can lay a finger on you. You specialize in criminal law. I've seen you also appear for Mr. Arun Jaitley. I've been at the Patiala House Court when you've begun your arguments in the defamation case that had been filed by him against Delhi's Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal. You were pitted against one of the biggest, larger-than-life lawyers, Mr. Ram Jethmalani. That battle was won. Take us through those days. Take us through what left an impact and how you secured that victory, sir.
I must tell you, my late father said one more thing. He said, there is no substitute for hard work. So he used to believe it was, the practice of law was 80% hard work, 20% intelligence. You need intelligence, but meticulousness is something you can't live without. And I must tell you, I've learned that from seniors like Mr. Nariman, Mr. P.R. Vakil. They would look at each comma, full stop, colon. I mean, it's amazing the kind of effort and commitment this Mr. Nariman still goes into. And every time, being in his presence is a learning experience. Mr. Jaitley's case was a very interesting moment. Ketki and I were flying back from Banaras from a personal visit. And I still remember it was 20th December 2015. We were in a flight and I saw these 25 missed calls from different people, including from Ryan Karanjawala, who was a dear friend and a senior colleague. So I called up and I was told, can you come here? And then I said, I'm at the airport. I'm still in the plane. And they said, no, we need to file a complaint. So and in the evening, Mr. Jaitley called me. 15 minutes, he spoke to me and said, Siddharth, will you do this for me? My first gut instinct was, I said, sir, why criminal defamation? Such a reputed, such a fantastic man Mr. Jaitley is and was. He said, no, I want to do this. Will you do it? I said, of course, sir, there's no question. A lot of people later wondered why I had been a Congress ASG and Mr. Jaitley chose me, but I think that was the graciousness of the man. He was very, very kind to me. In fact, when I became an ASG in 2012, he hosted a lunch for me, but did not do it in his own name in order to maintain sensitivities. And that was the greatness of the human being. Something to be remembered, something to learn from. I've learned a lot from him. After the case started, there were various lawyers who would come, and it was bitter. It was difficult from the day go, because there was a lot of media glare, and I ended up breaking one of my rules. I never speak to the media in cases, in matters that I do.
Yes.
But one day I got a request from Mr. Jaitley that, Siddharth, you have to do this because I can't do it. So I started speaking to the media on that case alone, and you will know this, in the last 20 odd years, I'd never spoken to the media on any other case which I've represented.
Yes.
So I did that, and as it went along, it reached a point when Mr. Jethmalani stepped into the fray. I must tell you, Mr. Jethmalani and my late father were contemporaries and colleagues, and I don't think there has been a greater lawyer practicing law in India, be it criminal law, be it constitutional law. Mr. Jethmalani was completely distinct. I have learned so much from him. I've been screamed at by him, but that was also a great learning experience, because the presence of the man was a great learning experience. The sad part is, though, I must tell you, and I'll tell you this anecdote, because what happened was, after my appearance against Mr. Jethmalani in court, I came back and Mr. Jaitley asked me this question. He says, how was he? That was the only question. My answer sadly was, sir, a pale shadow of what he was. It was not the Jethmalani I'd appeared with and opposed a year ago. By that time, Mr. Jethmalani had slowed down, and that crispness and that clarity of thought that I had seen since I joined practice in 91 till 2013-14 was not there, and therefore I can only say it was not enjoyable. I wish I'd had the privilege of opposing him at his brilliant best. I would have learnt a lot.
It was also a case that garnered, Mr. Luthra, a lot of attention also because of the politics behind it. There's another case that you've done where you were the special public prosecutor, that is the Nirbhaya gang rape case. It's a case that was watched very, very closely by everyone. It took around 8 years for justice to come in, but you were through and through the one person who helped in finally getting victory for Nirbhaya's family and for India. I want the legal challenges that you had seen before you, that were seen here, because it's also a case in which India saw challenges for a rape victim and her family to get justice that very clearly was seen not only in India but across the world.
So the Nirbhaya case was interesting because I mentioned this before. I was involved in it from the night or the morning that it happened. In fact, the team of officers who investigated, the senior officers, had to see me next morning and couldn't come, and they called up that they were busy with this. I was then involved through the initial days of the investigation, including the fact when the decision was taken to send her for treatment abroad.
Okay, that's in Singapore in December.
I did the Justice Usha Mehra Commission of Inquiry, which looked into it. I appeared before the Verma Commission of Inquiry. The trial was later done by Rajiv Mohan, Madhav Khurana, Mr. Ansari, and Dayan Krishnan, and they appeared in the High Court as well, though I continued to do various challenges to that matter through the years. When it came to the Supreme Court, I was asked to be special prosecutor. It went on, when it started, it went on for 9 months. Every Monday and Saturday post-lunch, every Monday and Friday post-lunch, and some Saturdays. One of the most interesting and challenging matters, because in matters where there is so much public glare a lawyer needs to be extra specially careful to be on their toes, because one misstep, one casual comment can be misconstrued. So that is an added pressure. It's not a professional pressure, it's a social media pressure. But you have to deal with it, that's part of the game. The evidence was voluminous. The study had to be meticulous, and there were certain areas where we had to deal with. For example, on the sentencing, the courts remanded it, instead of remanding it, decided to rehear on the sentencing. The Supreme Court reheard on the sentencing.
Yes.
Two amicus were appointed, two very good lawyers, Sanjay Hegde and Mr. Raju Ramachandran, outstanding lawyers who did a great job. So we had multiple challenges. I will only tell you the one thing that, and I must say this very candidly, is I'm not necessarily a votary of the death sentence, but I had to ask for the death sentence.
I was about to ask you that.
So I went through weeks, at least 3 weeks I remember, almost sleepless nights, thinking and looking at the material again and again whether I was doing the right thing. The instruction from the state was very clear,
Yes.
but my own conscience had to be clear, and I was convinced of it, and that is the reason I did plead to the best of my ability as to why the death sentence was necessary. What's important in that case is that there is now a new parameter that has been set out, and that is the judge's determination of society's cry for justice. That is to say, what is the objectivity of the judge in determining this concept, in determining whether death sentence ought or ought not to be granted. This is of course only available to death sentence cases, not other cases necessarily. But that's an important jurisprudential development.
Yes.
Let us see how it plays out in the future, because all these things are a matter of time.
Mr. Luthra, I also want to go back to flashback for some of us like me. I was in 2002 in Campus Law Center, where you've passed out from. It's in Delhi Law Faculty in Delhi University. I remember in our first moot, you had come inside court, and incidentally, luckily, I won that moot, but you were the judge there. We were 3 to 4 of us who won the moot. And when you walked in, all of us just wanted to be like you. You know, a smartly dressed lawyer walking in, and everybody said, all right, he's the judge. So since then, you've always had an impact on a lot of students who walk out of law schools. You're also conducting moots there in your father's name. We've also seen that you have a lot of impact. Your mother has had a lot of impact on you. The Urdu language you speak about very fondly. Other than law, what are the other interests that hold your attention? I know that a normal day for you begins at 6:30 a.m. It goes on till 11 p.m. You're working nearly 6 to 7 days a week. How do you find time for your family and for your personal interests?
Essentially, I'm a family man. I'm completely a family person, and I'm very oriented, not just the immediate family, the larger family. So it's my wife, my children, my late mother, my siblings, their families, my cousins, my uncles and aunts, and my close friends are very, very important to me. For me, if I have to celebrate any occasion in my life, I'm most happiest spending it with the people who are special and close to me. I've gone through 3 phases in my career. The first phase was the early years just when our eldest son was born, when Ketki and I had a lot more time, almost no money, and I was managing. That was a lot of time spent with family. You had a lot of time. The second phase was after I lost my father, when 97 onwards, for about 7-8 years, when I was sleeping about 4.5 hours a day. I wouldn't advise it to anybody. But there was a lot of pressure, and I was just trying to survive. I was just trying to, at least from 97, 98, though my mother had rental income and Ketki she was working with a law firm and she had a steady job. It was a question of survival, financial survival, to run your practice. Then came the stage 2004-05 onwards, when I started recalibrating my life, and from 2007 I've tried to recalibrate it more. So vacations are very important, time spent with the family is very important, and I try and take Friday evenings off, and Sunday, at least the first half is most normally off. Saturdays becomes very heavy. Sunday is now, because of the nature of practice in Supreme Court, once my practice shifted to the Supreme Court, you have to end up working a bit on Sundays. But I enjoy my walk, I enjoy reading. I started reading a lot of history in the last 8 or 10 years. I wonder where, but I read a lot of history. Some friends also recommend books, sometimes history fiction or just history. So that intrigues me and interests me. Some philosophy. And my passion is walking. So especially when I'm up in the hills in the last 6 months or so, I spent almost 4 months in the hills. We have a home there. Spent a lot of time with my mother and the family there in the last 10 years. So I end up walking a lot there.
That's amazing, because
about 8 to 10 kilometers a day.
You're looking fitter. I think COVID has suited some, because I've also seen when you're in the Supreme Court, the judges are often remarking on the beautiful scenery behind you, and it leaves all of us envious because we look at that beauty, and it's truly the way to go. I have a final question here, because you've been the Additional Solicitor General, sir. We've seen you appear as amicus. We've seen you in some of the very important cases where fundamental rights have been ascertained in India. Today, when we are seeing, sometimes we talk about corruption within the judiciary, sometimes we talk about destabilization of a certain lobby trying to destabilize the judiciary. What could your message be to the lobby? What could your message be to the judiciary? Because we have to ensure as Indians, the judiciary in India always has to be independent, always has to be above any sort of factor trying to destabilize it.
The judiciary independence is most crucial to the existence of the Republican democracy in this country. There are people who will continue to criticize it, but my view is this: it is for the governments, for the administration, because they are the ones who provide the force to enforce the orders of the judiciary, who must respect it. Governments don't necessarily like a strong judiciary. Let's be very clear. They don't like a very independent judiciary because they believe that that's an encroachment on their powers. There are issues about, crossing the Lakshman Rekha, but that's a separate issue. Let's park it separately for the time being. I believe it is two principles should be considered, two aspects must be considered. One, and the most important, the attack on judicial functioning merely because we may not believe the decisions are in consonance with populism or popularity is abhorrent to the respect for institutions, and that's a very unfortunate thing. Social media has given a vent to a lot of this. I blame you guys a lot because you keep questioning. There's a gentleman who keeps saying, why is this judgment passed? Well, if that's going to happen, you're really questioning the decision-making process without knowing the facts. That's really unfortunate. But let's understand, in a democracy and with media being the way it is, it's going to happen. So I think judges also need to be a little more, they're made of solid stuff. That's how they survive. I find it very difficult how they continue to do their job day after day with a smile on their faces, most of them at least. But judges need to also shrug off a lot of unnecessary criticism. But we need to provide a greater mechanism for protection of, how does a judge, I ask you, how does a judge protect his credibility if he's questioned on his decision making? He has only one power: contempt.
Precisely.
And the difficulty is contempt, since the parameters of contempt, though for other courts statutorily defined, are judicially defined, it becomes almost as if it's a case of individual application, which is not so. I think it is very important that we also, as the body of lawyers, the bar associations, the bar councils, must rise above their politics and criticize those who are mindlessly attacking the institution. They do much more harm. They're not a corrective. Yes, there are moments when we must question the working of the institution.
Absolutely.
I, for one, had written a letter, which had also signed a letter,
I remember,
about which became a little controversial because normally, you know, I don't, because I believe personally that the language there was, in retrospect, I believe the language was a little too harsh. But I did sign that letter because I was really perturbed about the migrant labor situation. I'm the son of immigrants in this country, so I'm going to be perturbed about things like this. But having said that, where does the common person go to redress their rights when governments are like a stone wall? And then a mindless attack on that institution weakens that institution. I for one, think that we cannot let that happen. And all right-minded lawyers and professionals must ensure that irrational attacks, criticism of the judiciary must be quelled by sensible lawyers speaking up, by sensible professionals speaking up. We don't do it often enough.
Absolutely. In fact, I think you could have been a mathematician, sir. You could have been an architect like you wanted. You could have been a freelance, you could have been a journalist, but it was your calling to be a lawyer, not a criminal lawyer, a lawyer to uphold the judiciary like you're saying. I thank you for giving us time because we've also got a perspective into how law has to be upheld in the rightest way possible. Thank you for being with us on The Legal Eagle. We will see you next week.